Prevent Connect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or CALCASA.
Hi, my name is Ashley Klein-Jimenez. I'm from Prevent Connect. I'm here with our partners at Prevention Institute. You're joining us for Re-Envisioning Community Norms, Social Norms Change as a Sexual and Domestic Violence Prevention Strategy. I'm so excited to be here with our friends at Prevention Institute, Alicia and Abina. Thank you both for everything that you do for us, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. So there you go, Alicia. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. I want to give a special shout out to Abina for this web conference, and she really helped with a lot of the outlining and shaping the content. So really looking forward today. We have a packed agenda, which includes objectives around outlining norms that contribute to sexual and domestic violence and what's needed to address them. We're also going to have our guests share how they're changing norms to prevent sexual and domestic violence through a multitude of strategies, because we know it's not just about one program or one thing, but to really change our environments and to change norms takes multiple strategies together. And then we're hoping to engage in a discussion on how all of you are tying your efforts to broader conversations and momentum. And we'd love for you to share your successes and challenges. So we invite you to do that in the text chat throughout the web conference and just share any reflections you have as we go. So with that, I thought I could start off by sharing a definition of norms, because we're going to be talking a lot about them today. So norms refer to values, beliefs, and attitudes and or behaviors that are shared by a group of people. And so they're considered behavior shapers based in culture and tradition, and they're sort of unseen. They're taken for granted, and they aren't things people are thinking about a lot. But luckily today we get to think more deeply about norms that contribute to sexual and domestic violence and what we can do to really change those norms. And so in exactly a year ago, actually, Prevention Institute wrote a blog post that I just shared the link to in the text chat. And in it, we outlined 5 norms that shape gender-based violence. And so the first one is around rigid gender norms about masculinity that promote domination, control, and risk-taking. So things like people saying no means try harder. Or rigid gender norms about femininity that promotes compliance and sacrifice. So we hear things like go along to get along. We also see our society placing a lot of value on claiming and maintaining power, which too often gets expressed as power over other people. And so we'll hear things like, what do you expect? That's what strong leaders do. We also see violence as pervasive in our society, and it's often deployed as mechanisms for addressing conflict or resolving problems. And then the last norm that I wanted to mention is looking at sexual and domestic violence as a private matter and not a public concern. And so people will turn their eye and say, it's none of my business to deal with this, and even focus on prevention for it. And so those are some of the norms that we wanted to mention, and hope that our guests will be able to share how they're addressing some of them today. So I wanted to share quickly, we're already seeing a lot of change in these norms, but at the same time, issues still do persist. So for example, a study that will be in the Journal of Gender and Society found that people believe women should have equal opportunities in work and in politics. And so that's an area that we've seen some progress over time. But still today, people continue to think that women should do more of the homemaking and child rearing. So we'll share the link to a New York Times article that talks about that study in the text chat for you. One of our guests who is going to be presenting a little bit later is from Promundo, and his name is Brian. And I just wanted to invite Brian right now to share a little bit about some of these norms, and specifically I think Brian's going to speak mostly to norms around masculinity. So Brian, are you there?
I'm here and I'm ready to go, and just quickly I'll click the slide back because I was hoping to do a little, almost like a pop quiz thing, but these slides on this platform I guess aren't able to do the animations and things appearing. So hopefully not all of you saw the answer to this first item, but yeah, as Alicia said, I'm here from Promundo. I'll be speaking more about our programming in a little bit, but Promundo also does a lot of research on just the prevalence and the shape of norms related to intimate partner violence, to sexual violence, and specifically quite a lot of work on harmful definitions of masculinity, both in the United States and all around the world. And just to demonstrate how, we're looking at all these norms about that Alicia was just talking about, that, okay, no means just try harder, or all these very regressive ideas about sex, about relationships, about masculinity. And maybe it helps to just ground ourselves in, okay, how common are these ideas still here in the US, or like with the populations we're working with? And Promundo happens to have some pretty new data that speak to that. So I just wanted to share that very quickly. So just to be a little bit interactive, I wanted everyone to think, okay, in our nationwide study with young men aged 18 to 30 that we fielded about a year ago now, we asked all of those young men to tell us whether they agreed that society as a whole, that they're receiving a message from society that a real man should have as many sexual partners as he can. What proportion of young men kind of feel that pressure from society or encounter that message in the world? And okay, you already saw this one maybe before. Fully 60% of a nationally representative sample of 18 to 30-year-old men across the United States tell us that they still encounter that very harmful idea about masculinity in their society. And that's even higher than the rates we saw in the United Kingdom and in Mexico, though all of those numbers, even 42% of young men telling us that norm or that idea is commonplace around them is certainly far too many. Okay, and then maybe just one more. This time, rather than asking the young men about what society is telling them, so to speak, we're asking about their own personal opinion. So in your personal opinion, we're asking to these 18 to 30-year-old guys, do you agree or not? Do you agree that if a guy has a girlfriend or wife, he deserves to know where she is all the time? So sort of a norm about kind of inequitable power and control in a relationship, that like the man in a heterosexual relationship should always know the movements of the woman in the relationship. So what percentage of guys personally believe that? Ooh, Sean Woods, good job. Sean Woods on the chat was very close. He said 45%, and it's 46%. Maybe he had a sneak preview of the slides also. So this is just to demonstrate that these ideas are unfortunately alive and well in the populations we're working with here in the United States. And very quickly, I know that the bar charts can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes, but I wanted to really emphasize that merely holding these attitudes isn't the whole problem in and of itself, as Alicia and others were emphasizing. Like, we want to change the norms because we believe and know through empirical data how powerful they are as root causes of things like sexual violence and intimate partner violence. So what you're looking at from the same study here is a division of all of those young men, 18 to 30-year-old young men, into 5 different groups, all the way from the 20% of them who have the most positive attitudes, so who are disagreeing with all of those negative attitudes I just shared, as all the way up to the young men who hold on most strongly to those attitudes. And this is using not just those 2 examples that I shared, but a scale of 17 total items. And then on the y-axis, this is the proportion of young men in that category who told us that they had perpetrated sexual harassment within the last month. So you can see just how strong the relationship is, that the more strongly you hold on to those negative norms about masculinity, by leaps and bounds, you're dramatically more likely to also report perpetrating sexually predatory behavior. And I know we need to move very quickly throughout all of this, so we can't go into all the details, but the data that I just shared are available for free online, and I think Abina will post the links in the chat box right now in our study called the Man Box. And of course, we're using the name there coming from all of the pioneering work from Paul Keevil and the Oakland Men's Project in, developing that act like a man box activity that probably a lot of us have used in our community activism before, but we use that as kind of a frame for that study. So to learn more about all the statistics I was just sharing, that's the report on the left-hand side. And then another report on the right-hand side that more recently has come out is looking not only at sexual violence or at intimate partner violence, but at 8 different forms of violence, including suicide, homicide, even drawing connections with conflict and war, just really looking at those harmful masculine norms as a root cause of many, many different kinds of violence and exploring that through gender theory and empirical data. So I thought that was maybe a useful little contribution to this intro section. So over to you, Alicia.
Yeah, and I think that I really recommend checking out both of those. The Prevent Connect community is definitely looking more at the intersections across forms of violence. So I definitely recommend looking at the norms and violence for those of you who are wanting to explore more of the connections between the different forms. So we're looking forward to bringing Brian back a little bit later on again. So thank you again for that intro. We wanted to share that Pew Research Center also has some data that may be helpful for all of you. And often we think that some of these norms around masculinity, for example, are held more with the older generations. But one of the things that this study found is that millennial men are more likely than older men to say that their gender faces pressure to throw a punch if provoked, join in when others talk about women in a sexual way, and to have many sexual partners. So I think that's quite congruent with what Brian was sharing. And before we get to our first guest today, we've kind of explored already a little bit about these norms, and I know Brian was able to expand a little bit on norms around masculinity. And I wanted to point out this is about norms change, and to really change these norms, it's not just about a single program, as I mentioned before. We can't just tell people how to act. It's not just about those individual knowledge and skills, but it's about comprehensive action across what we call the spectrum of prevention. So policies, things like equal pay even, which we talked about on a web conference last year. Those types of policies can also help change norms, along with things that organizations are doing in terms of their policies and practices, creating coalitions, educating providers, etc. So if you're wanting to know more about the spectrum of prevention in this context, I do recommend checking out that blog post that I shared earlier. I'm going to share it once more because it has more examples throughout the spectrum. So with that, I want to turn it over to our first guests for today, which are from the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault. So we have Shashwati, who is the Director of Program Administration and Finance at the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault. In this role, she wears multiple hats, including directing the Alliance's research and community-based prevention efforts and leading the New York City Sexual Violence Prevention Regional Center. She designed and launched Project DOT back in 2014, which is what her and her team are going to be talking about today. Hi, Shashwati.
Hi.
We also have Gina, who is the founder and executive director of Youth Empowerment, of Just As I Am, Youth Empowerment, which is a leadership program for teens and youth and young adults, and it offers workshops and trainings in mindfulness and personal development. And Gina is also part of the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault team, serving as a senior prevention manager overseeing Project DOT. So I'll just say hi to you as well, Gina.
Hi, thank you.
You're welcome. And we also are lucky enough to have Joanne, who started off as a participant in Project DOT, and is now the youth educator who facilitates DOT sessions and conducts outreach. She's a student at LaGuardia College and also the creator of For the Love of Joe, a space for women to love and support one another, which is really great. Hi, Joanne.
Hi, how are you?
Great. We're so happy that you could join us as well. So before I ask all of you a question, I wanted to get the audience to also engage a little bit. So, I shared some of those norms already, and I wanted to ask what harmful norms you're trying to change in your community. And it doesn't necessarily have to be worded according to the 5 that I outlined before, but just want to start getting all of you thinking about harmful norms that you're trying to change. And while you're responding, Shashadi, Gina, Joanne, how are you trying to change norms to prevent sexual violence in New York City? And I'd love if you could share about Project DOT and the different components that you're hoping are going to contribute to norms change.
Thank you so much, Alicia, and welcome everybody. We are so excited to be here and be sharing some of the work we are doing. I do want to start by talking a little bit about who we are at the Alliance. So the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault, that's a mouthful. So we do go by the street name of the Alliance. The Alliance is a New York City-based agency. We work as a mouthpiece organization looking at policy, prevention, as well as very comprehensive intervention services. And we provide technical assistance and training and resources to our rape crisis partners throughout New York State. So we do have a pretty comprehensive role. But within those roles, one of my favorite, stuff here at the Alliance is to be able to work on prevention. And Project DOT is really a part of that effort. So I do want to talk about Project DOT a little bit, but before that, I also want to share a little bit about some of the strategies that really help us think about how do we think as professionals, as advocates, like how do we really organize ourselves as, those facilitators of changing social norms and, giving the right set of tools to our young people. So as we kind of go through the slides, I also want to welcome Joanne. And kind of between Joanne and I, we are hoping to bring in for the next couple slides, to bring in our perspective. So I would like to talk about DOT from the perspective of having created this, and then I would, love for Joanne to be able to share some of her perspective as, being a DOT leader and then transitioning into an educator. So without much ado, I want to talk a little bit about DOT. So Project DOT came from a place of dire need. Before we dove into Project DOT, we wanted to see what type of youth programs were out there, and our community was constantly asking for, what about young people? They're not getting any education. They are in after school, but not all after school programs are talking about sexual violence. So that's how Project DOT came about. And what has been critical in our work in Project DOT is that we wanted to make sure that it was not another program, and it was fulfilling a very, a gap that was obvious. So Project DOT is a youth leadership program that looks at healthy relationship, and we engage young people from historically underserved community. In doing so, we have been very careful and mindful in the framework we have used. We have thought about what are some of the struggles and voices that are missing from traditional curricula that are out there engaging young people. So Project DOT really fulfills those gaps, but we also want to be very careful in terms of, as a community-based agency and as advocates, we don't want to be showing up in community as change makers. We want the community and the young people in those communities to be those change makers. So our thought was really around what tools could we provide our communities and young people so that they could, make those changes. So in terms of the social norms, Alicia, that you mentioned, they were very helpful. And in our work with Project DOT, we have been really thoughtfully approaching many of those social norms. So we look at harmful norms around masculinity, femininity, We look at, the general tolerance of aggression and violence in young, peer culture among young people. And these are really things that young people are talking about, that there are no resources, nobody is talking to them about. So these are really big gaps and challenges that we have seen come up. So this is, DOT is really like an acronym that we came up with, but this is what it stands for. Project DOT stands for Dream, Own, Tell. And this is something that our young people came up with. So everything about this project is what our young people shared and guided us with. So I wanted to share a little bit about how Project DOT is helping change social norms. And Joanne and I would tag team a little bit on this. But before that, I think something that we learned along the way in terms of norm change is that in order for us as advocates to be thinking or considering norms change, we really have to understand our positionality and who we are, and which communities are we interfacing with. Is our strategies for norms change community responsive? Are they further stereotyping and marginalizing those communities? Also remembering that, it's really important to think of norms change as a community effort, and it takes a village to change those social norms, and thinking about how people in the community who are affected by those social norms can really participate in making and creating those changes. Because sometimes as advocate, and this is something I caught myself doing several times, I forget. I feel like I'm the sexual assault expert and I know it all, but that's not true all the time. I don't know what works for another community. I don't know exactly what would take for the changes to actually, take effect in that community. So in those instances, as we are thinking of changing social norm, a ground rule is to really bring this conversation to the very people who are involved in those communities, who live in those communities, and who belong to those communities. So really, taking those experiences as part of the larger conversation is really critical to thinking about norms change. So in terms of Project DOT, we were in the way we had this program set up was in several different components. We definitely thought about the principles of prevention that I'm sure everybody, takes into consideration, but dosage was really important. We wanted to do work that would really have an impact. Even though we would reach fewer people, we wanted more intense depth, like deeper level conversation. So Project DOT has 3 components. There is an educational component, which is 7 to 8 weeks curriculum where we engage young people. There is a community mobilization component, which is about a 4 to 6 week initiative where young people actually go out into their communities and engage adults, significant adults and adult community members, as well as other young people. And then finally, we have a social media campaign, which is youth-driven. Youth come up with the messages. We have a hashtag that goes by Nobody Told Me and Everybody Told Me, where young people talk about what people actually told them about, but what they forgot or left out of those conversations. So for example, everybody told me to use a rubber, but nobody told me to check in with my lover. We felt like that was such a great way of talking about consent. So these are the 3 components, and we want to talk a little bit about how we have designed the 3 components to really think about social norms. And the reason I'm saying this is because what we are doing is not out of the box. It's not, rocket science. I'm sure all the other advocates are doing it, but really critically thinking about how could we create a curriculum that's broad enough that it really welcomes the different voices of people from different communities. Because when we started doing this work, we felt that, even as a South Asian person, I just could not, find myself in those curriculum or the narrative that was shared. So it was tough. I could not imagine other communities kind of, not struggling with a similar experience as I was. So I want to welcome Joanne a little bit for her perspective as a Project DOT change maker, as well as an educator now, to kind of talk a little bit about how she thought having gone through the curriculum changed the way she was able to identify healthy, unhealthy norms.
Hello, everyone. When I first started Project DOT, I really wasn't aware of a lot of the things that we were being taught. I actually realized that I didn't know half of the things that I thought I did about healthy relationships. So I really think that when Project DOT starts their curriculum, it allows us to not take a chance to learn what a healthy relationship looks like, and also take this curriculum and bring it back to our communities. I think it was awesome to have a place where we can not only learn, but actually go back to our communities with the support of the Project DOT staff and actually bring change to our communities, because they often tell us that, yes, we can make a change, but as young people, we really don't know. And with the help of Project DOT and all the adults that are, professionals, and they've been able to support us and, letting us do something on our own and bringing change to our communities. So I think that's, really awesome. And now the fact that I'm a youth educator, I get to, help other youth in my community bring change for their generation.
Thank you, Joanne. And I think what Joanne pointed out and we learned along the path was that we really wanted to be able to help young people and provide them with the tools that they needed to identify those tools, really identify the source of those tools, like where are we learning, like where are we getting those social norms from? Is it from our community? Is it from the school? Is it from, the social media, from music that we listen to? So there was a lot of different ways that we tried to kind of parse in ways of kind of understanding social norms change. But what we did was we took the curriculum, we used a whole bunch of different exercises such as gender box and unpacking messaging, like getting like a list of identifying like good and not so good advices from parents and community. And then once young people were able to understand and look at the harmful social norms, we kind of moved them into a practicum phase, which is one portion of the practicum phase is the community mobilization. So once they learned about how to identify social norms, where they come from, felt comfortable challenging them, the next step of the program was for them to go out into the community and be able to engage their community members. And here you're seeing a couple of examples from those. So young people have done radio show where they were out. I think they did a radio show for the Haitian community. There were parents asking questions that parents were wondering about, and that really tied back to all the norms that that generation, the generation of parents, were really grappling with, and how they were still trying to kind of bring some of those into the conversation and understanding youth. Young people also did community teach-ins. Gina is going to talk a little bit about that. Gina is also going to highlight and leverage our work around adult engagement. But one other component of community mobilization that I wanted to highlight was peer engagement. So with peer engagement, it was really critical because we had young people bring 2 or 3 of their friends to go in for like 2 sessions of bring in the bystander curriculum. So that was really huge. These would be young people who would never step into our doors, who would never seek services, but here they are, coming in for a session, and the young people were able to make that happen. And finally, the campaign, that was really helpful for us to kind of bring everything together. All the messages that you're seeing here comes from our young people. As we go through the entire curriculum, everything that we get from young people, from worksheets to the exercises, like when we do the gender box, we save all the responses, and with consent from young people, we turn them into content for campaign. So that's really how we are kind of doing some of this work. Here's another slide on the work that young people have been able to create. You can check out our website, or you can also contact me. My information is at the very end, and I'll be happy to kind of talk a little bit more and share our strategies.
I wanted to share some of the things that are coming up in the text chat with everyone. So some norms that people spoke to were things like toxic masculinity in rural settings. People talked about working with LGBTQ communities, also thinking about the differences between gender and sex and changing the norms around that. So one's based in biology, that being sex, and gender being more socially constructed. People also talked about norms around stigma about sexual abuse. And one that was really interesting is about norms in our field and how often we'll look at prevention as preventing victimization, and how we need to change that norm so we're all thinking about preventing perpetration. And along with that, one around the norm that we just need to focus on just the young people and not thinking about the broader community. And so I know that the next thing that Shashwati, you mentioned was engaging significant adults and the work that you're doing in these different components of not just focusing on youth, but also the adults. And so I'm wondering if you all can share more about what engaging significant adults in your work looks like.
Hi, well, this is Gina. As I started with Project DOT, I started as a community member. So coming from my nonprofit, Just As I Am, Youth Empowerment, we partnered with Project DOT to, we brought our youth and they taught their curriculum. And it was from that curriculum where our community of African American young people felt that they've been getting, because part of Project DOT's curriculum, we talk about pop culture. We talk about the lyrics, the messaging that we're getting from ads and stuff like that in pop culture. And the young people admitted that that's where most of their education around dating and relationships had come from. And so they said that they weren't getting any information from their parents or for some of the older adults in their lives. And so that became the impetus for them to do like the radio show, and eventually they did a teaching as well, and they spoke to adults in the community from their churches, parents, older siblings, and they shared the impact of not having adult input in their dating education as per se. So then we got to, we said we wanted to dive a little deeper with this, so we actually the young people actually pulled together a focus group, and they did the focus group themselves. We taught them about, the whole research aspect of what a focus group is. And they did the focus group with adults and community members. And the adults were saying that, they didn't learn how to speak about this with their children. Most of them, didn't have any experience themselves and kind of learned on the spot. And they were really interested in breaking that cycle and they said they needed help. And so it was through that group of young leaders that they decided they want to put together parent training. And so the next level of where we are now is the young people developed a 4-hour parent training that allows the community to allow significant adults to come in and learn about ways to safely and, just learn about ways that would support young people in their voice being heard, but ways to have those discussions that didn't push the young people away, And so we also talked about including, community members like barbers and church members and the person that is on the corner store that they see often, to bring them into these conversations so that they can address these norms of gender, the gender norms, the tolerance against the tolerance of aggression, and the whole discussion about whether dating violence is a public or private issue. And these things are able to come up in this training that the young people created themselves.
Yeah, that's so important. And someone in the text chat box was saying that they really like that you're focusing on youth as experts and having them play a role in engaging significant adults. So Gina, the first time we talked, I was really curious, you're doing such great work. How are you actually reaching these young people in the first place? And I'm hoping you can share some of your tips and lessons in the recruitment process.
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. Well, definitely, as you were saying, using youth as experts is an important part. We realized at first we were recruiting young people for a youth advisory committee, and we thought that that would be special. And then we realized we need to ask the young people, what are they looking for to enhance their knowledge, to put on their resumes, to put on their college applications. And it was more so of, leadership, civic leadership. It was more so of what skills could they get out of this internship. And so we redesigned, we rebranded how we reached out to them, and we created the title of Civic Leadership Interns. And as those interns, we were able to give them certain skills, right? And we want to teach them how to come together with a vision and how to come together to make change. And we also talked about language. How do we use, someone had said before about our norms during our work, during this work we're doing, and how we assume things. So we assume that when we put, like, for example, young people of color, we're looking for young people of color. We use that language in our work here, but young people in the streets don't use that terminology. And so we had to really think about what norms are we creating and supporting that might not be useful to the people who we're trying to reach. So language is a big part, using youth as experts to discuss language, to discuss who they want to collaborate with and what kind of networking they want to do, who they want to reach. We do a lot of collaboration with the community, and I think that's a huge piece. For the young people, when we were doing the Jaya group and they wanted to speak to the Haitian radio station, I wouldn't have thought of that, but they felt that need. So we listened to them and talked to them about who they want to connect with. We offer them stipends, to support their transportation. We make sure we always have food, because that is very important, right, Joanne? And certificates that they can use to show that they have attended this 13-week program, and they're getting career skills out of it, because, we talk about planning, we talk about how to present in front of a group. We give them skills in communication and speaking to the media, because we do have media, especially with the Me Too movement and things that are going on. Media do consult us, and the young people really want to be heard, and I think that's the bottom line. They want to be heard, so if you can find a way to give them a voice, you'll get them in.
And I love that you're creating a space for them to be heard. Now, measuring changes in norms is difficult. And I know that your goal is to, change a lot of these norms that contribute to sexual violence. And so I'm wondering if you have any success stories to share or anything to share around how you're measuring impact.
Thank you, Alicia. This is Shashwati. So Project DOT has been a journey for us, and I'd be honest and say it's not been the perfect journey. We have had to pause. We have had to kind of think. We had to re-strategize. But if you think about the change and the impact, if I had to kind of say it in one word, I feel like nothing would have been possible, and the numbers that you right now see on that on the slide would not have been possible if we not had the guidance of young people. And as advocates, we just have to keep reminding ourselves that they are really, the people who are going to guide us in this work. And every time we have been faltering, we were unsure. Our young people have been the experts that have kind of helped us think through, strategize, in this entire work with Project DOT. So I do want to quickly share a story, and then before we wrap up. So we have been doing evaluation that I would share a little bit in the next slide. Here it is. So I want to go back to one of the slides so that I could share the work that really brought some attention from a music company. So here is, so we looked at all the music and the different lyrics. So here you have the Eminem's "Love the Way You Lie," and the comment in green is what one of our young people came up with. So when we did this exercise around like looking at music and kind of coming up with reactions to some of the harmful messages that these music was sharing, we took all of those and with permission and consent from young people, we turned them into consent messages, and here is what you have. So when we did the campaign, we had a record company come out and tell us like, oh, you know what, we have been doing music for so long, and we just never knew. Like I saw your campaign, I saw this message, we did not know that music had so much power and some of the harmful norms that it's like putting out there. So that in and of itself was such a big success for us to think that, sometimes people are not thinking about these actively outside of our field, and how young people's work could really have those, long-lasting impact on people that are not, in the field, like a music company. So I just wanted us to, think about that for a little bit, because we never know how change happens and from which direction. So that's really something for us as advocates to think about when we lose heart, when we don't see the change right away. A glimmer of hope would somehow come in from one direction or the other. So I do want to wrap up by, welcoming Joanne back and having her share a little bit about her experience as a DOT leader and educator, and what impact she has kind of, found this program have on her, and how is she impacting others in the work.
Hello, everyone. I am so grateful to have Project DOT. When I first started, as Ms. Gina mentioned, she has the organization JIVE, just as I am Youth Empowerment. I came from there, and when I first started, I was really taken aback because I realized that I didn't know as much as I thought I did. I was in an abusive relationship in high school, and I did meet with a counselor, but when I came to Project DOT, I learned way more than, the counselor taught me. And just when I was at Project DOT, there were some triggers that came up because of my past, but I was supported, and, most importantly, like I was shown that it was okay to feel the way that I did, and also learning from my experiences, and, from the curriculum, I think is so important because it really helps educate you on what's okay and what's not okay, and like being a youth, well, at the time, I feel, I would go back to my friends and tell them all the things that I'm learning, because I would be able to pick out unhealthy behavior in 2 seconds. And it just became like second nature to me. Even my vocabulary changed. I started using consent more, and, like my friends would not understand what that meant, and that would be a perfect opportunity for me to share what I've learned with Project DOT. And now being a youth educator, I get to be on the other side of the table and bringing my community more education on these topics that are extremely important, because, this generation, our social media is, it's out of control, and it's so powerful. So we want to make sure that you're getting the positive messages out there and not the negative ones, because the negative ones seem to drag more attention. So being the fact that I can be part of being part of a change, whether I'm in the group or not, really makes me feel like such a leader in my community. And this is work that you can take with you wherever you go, and no matter how old you are, you could implement this type of work. And I really feel like this curriculum should be in schools rather than the health classes that they do provide for the youth. That's just my opinion, but I've grown so much, not only as a leader, but as a woman, and standing in my truth and what it is that I want for myself and my community.
Thank you, Joanne, for sharing your personal experience and being so open with all of us today. On a web conferencing platform, it's not always easy to do that since you can't see faces. So we really appreciate that. And to the rest of your team, thank you for this great effort that you're doing. We're going to bring you all back at the end. I know we have Shashwati's information here if you want to connect more on their work. They're going to come back at the end, but I want to make sure that we get back to Brian from Promundo. Brian, I just want to do a quick sound check with you. Make sure you're still there.
Check, check, check. 1, 2, 3.
Yes, we can hear you, Brian. So Brian is a senior research officer at Promundo, where his work focuses on eliminating harmful masculine norms, preventing all forms of gender-based violence, and achieving broader gender equality and social justice in the United States and around the world. Brian has co-authored several research reports, which I know we've already started sharing a few of those earlier today, and we'll continue to share in the text chat as we go. Brian has extensive program and research experience in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Middle East, and is deeply engaged as a sexual violence prevention educator in Minnesota. So it's really great to be having some global perspectives here with us today. Brian, I know when you first spoke earlier today, you did share a little bit about Promundo, but hoping you can share more and let us know how you're thinking about gender norms change in your programming.
Yeah, absolutely, and I really, really appreciate the opportunity, especially to share the space with Project DOT, who are just amazing. And I have to say, Shashwati and team, I was really blown away by your presentation at the National Sexual Assault Conference, and just so excited to be reconnected with you. And man, your work is really, really inspiring. And happy also to introduce a lot of you to Promundo. As Alicia was saying, we do have kind of an international footprint, so to speak, and a lot of our history and work takes place overseas, and so that's why it's kind of exciting to start to do some work in the U.S. and use the Prevent Connect network to meet a lot of like-minded folks and maybe come up with some good collaborations. So Promundo's, as you can see in the picture here, we were actually founded 20 years ago in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and that's the sort of location and the time where our founding philosophy comes from, really using critical consciousness coming from that Paulo Freirean pedagogy, critical consciousness to bring real attention to gender norms as a root cause of a lot of harms in society. And our work now has expanded around the world. I sit in Minnesota personally, though our kind of U.S. headquarters is in D.C. And as you'll see, we also have programming in Pittsburgh. So there's probably a lot of good regional opportunities to collaborate with people on the call today. But I think just in basic terms, when Promundo thinks about our work on gender norm change, we use this phrase, gender transformative programming, and I kind of just wanted to introduce that way of thinking or that term to the call here today and to all of your work to help you kind of assess in any program that you're doing, any campaign, any norm change initiative to really try to address issues like sexual violence and like intimate partner violence. Are we being fundamentally transformative of these harmful underlying norms? And what it means to be gender norm transformative is we really take messages about masculinity, messages about femininity, the inequitable arrangement of power and control, that intersectional feminist lens, and bring that right into the project itself. So we make our, if it's the classroom discussion, make the classroom discussion very much about harmful norms about femininity and masculinity. Don't just kind of work around, around the margins of that. Actually take that as the central kind of learning process that the participants go through, is to see gender norms in a new way, to see how harmful they are to themselves, to their community, and then imagine, a better way of living. And that seems maybe obvious, especially in a webinar that's focused on norm change initiatives, but it is actually pretty easy to do things that accidentally reinforce gender norms. Maybe you come up with a program that's trying to reach school-age boys and girls, and you decide, oh, well, for the boys are really, really interested in sports, so we're just going to do like a sports thing for the boys, and the girls are really interested in fashion, so we're going to do like a fashion kind of discussion thing with the girls. And then all of a sudden, you're kind of reinforcing some of the binary thinking, some of the keeping folks inside of a box, even if it's well-intentioned. And so, yeah, I wonder, just wanted to offer that idea that the way that Promundo has applied this Freirean critical consciousness perspective in our work is to make sure that everything we're doing is very gender norm transformative.
Yeah, that's a
Back to
really
you,
good
Alicia.
example to help. Yeah, that's a really good example to help illuminate what you mean by gender transformative programming. And so, would love for everyone participating today to chime in the text chat of how you're incorporating a gender transformative approach in your work. I know some of this may have already come up in the earlier question, but any reflections you have on this approach, would love for you to share. Now, we've really been talking about how it's not just about one thing, but, working across what at Prevention Institute we call the spectrum of prevention, and how, these are really complex norms we're trying to change, and you can't just have one program to do so. So how does Promundo work across multiple levels and multiple entry points?
Sure. I'll try to move as quickly as I can. I know we lost a little bit of time, and I'm really eager to save time for conversation. So quickly, Promundo's sort of menu of our core programming they all have these single letter names: Program H, Program M, Program D. That's kind of the library of our programming. And Program H is our gender transformative curricula specifically intended for groups of young men. Same with Program M, which stands for Mujer, or it originally comes from the Portuguese, of groups of young women. The curriculum Program D, focusing on diversidad, is bringing in a perspective that sort of tries to push at that gender binary and bring in more considerations, really working against homophobia, bringing in a more plurality of identities and acceptance for all forms of sexual and gender identities. And then also talk a little bit about Program P, which is Padre, and this is more recently we're begun to do work with men through the entry point of their roles as fathers. We find that a lot of men are very eager to be engaged, caring, loving, nurturing fathers in a way that sort of pushes against some of the traditional gender role division and definitions on that side. So again, as I've shared before, probably the most effective thing I can do in just 10 or 15 minutes on this call is introduce you to Promundo, help you find where our resources are, but I'd be so eager for anybody who hears anything interesting in what I'm saying to reach out to me directly, and we can continue to work together. So, a full toolkit for what Program H, M, and D are all about is available for free on our website. Same for Program P. You can download these things. We're just none of this is proprietary, very eager for anybody to pick it up, adapt it, use it, and let us know how it works in their communities and help us improve it as well. But exactly as Alicia was saying, I think the idea of working with different groups, working across different age levels, even as Project Dot gave the example, not only engaging youth, of course that's important, but you can't put all the responsibility just on young people to make these transformations if the structures around them aren't supportive in that. So engaging the significant adults is a fantastic step, like Project Dot was doing. So in Promundo's side, we kind of use this ecological onion kind of model here, where at the individual level, yes, we do have curricula and programs for young people that are focused very specifically on trying to help that person go through a process of critical consciousness, seeing what the man box is, or a woman box, or a gender identity box for the first time, thinking outside of that. But we also work at the relationship level, meaning all of these group education sessions we do are taking place within that reference group for young people. So, social norms are social by definition, right? That's why we call them social norms. They're created by not just inside the mind of one individual person. It's actually what that person expects that most of their friends and people they look up to would do in any given situation. That sort of becomes the guts of the norm, or what that group of their friends, their peers, their role models, what I, as an individual person, think that group expects of me. That's how kind of a norm gets made. And so a powerful thing we do is to create safe space within that reference group, within that group of friends, where this whole group of friends is going through this process of gender transformative thinking together. And then I guess not unlike Project DOT, but different in different settings, we're trying to bring it to the community level as well, empowering program participants to bring their stories, if they feel safe and comfortable to do that, into community campaigns to really lift up and elevate some of the successes we've had in those programs at more of a community level. And then way up at the highest, I mean, we have to be talking about structural forms of patriarchy and oppression if we're going to really make any progress in this area at all. So we're also trying to be working at that broader level, economic structural level, policy structural level. Promundo does a lot of advocacy writing and work to promote more progressive legislation and policies against, to criminalize sexual and intimate partner violence, to remove restrictions, really to push for more generous paid leave and family leave time for, parents and family members of all genders to be able to really level that care work within the home, and that's where some of the fatherhood work comes in. So yeah, that's just a glimpse of how we're trying to work across all of those levels. Because we know, and this is a busy slide, but like I was saying, individual reflection or just one classroom conversation is never going to be enough to transform the way that young men are thinking, or young women, or members of other gender identities for that matter. But we do kind of focus on young men as the identity sort of empirically most likely to be perpetrating sexual violence and intimate partner violence. We also need, positive changes in the lives of those most affected by these forms of gender oppression, changes in those, significant adults, and in all of these other areas. So just to reinforce that point underneath this whole session, that, as it says on the right-hand side, we maybe in our programs might notice we spend a little too much time thinking about the individual level and can be doing more on the structural side.
Yeah,
Alicia, did you want me to just
definitely.
keep going? Okay.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say we're having some great discussion coming up in the text chat. We're going to share out some themes after. You can maybe first share a little bit about program H&M and how you've brought it to the U.S., so I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll have time just to very briefly introduce kind of two main domains of programs. One is the youth programs, program H&M, and then also I will touch on program P for fatherhood in a little bit. So program H&M, yeah, this is really, one of the foundational programs that Promundo has come up with. And it really emerged from, even in the late 90s, work in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, trying to bring this critical gender transformative consciousness to work with young men whose lives are really marked by a lot of violence around them, violence in their own behaviors, violence in their neighborhoods, and sort of tapping into those young men's desire to live a more gender equitable, more violence-free existence, and sort of working in partnership with those young people, developing a lot of the activities that we still use. And as I was saying, I think the key reason why we find it effective in tackling social norms is because it creates a safe space for a group of friends, or like peers, to be working through those processes together, that you're actually transforming what that reference group for any social norm is thinking all at once. So the bullet points here say it's a chance to learn. So there would be some, of course, like introduction to basic gender theory concepts. What is masculinity? What is this man box? Oh, you notice that it actually isn't really all that biological. It actually is more socially created and therefore changeable and therefore built to serve somebody's narrow power interests rather than the greater good of the community. And then you discuss and kind of practice along with your friends different ways of thinking about that, different ways of acting. So this work is, at this point, almost 20 years old, and the original program H&M curricula have been, you see the globe here, adapted and implemented in various ways in quite a lot of locations all around the world. And in a majority of these places, we've done some kind of an evaluation to see that, okay, it's actually delivering on the promise of, or delivering on the objectives that we expect it to. And just as a quick zoom of some of the things we've seen, we certainly have documented that participants in program H&M adaptations have decreased perpetration of sexual harassment, decreased perpetration of IPV. A lot of the adaptations focus a lot on sexual and reproductive health behaviors, not unlike Project DOT. and we've seen big increases in, healthier practices related to sexual health. Also, findings from young women in Brazil that the young men involved in the program were really demonstrating some real meaningful changes, and again, that link to care work. So a lot of, and for anyone interested, I'd be able to provide all of these studies, evaluations, and everything in the background, but want to be a little bit quick today. But the exciting opportunity that we have now is that coming from that real global experience and learning, we're able to bring the project to the U.S. really for the first time. And I think that's actually kind of an exciting reversal of that power dynamic, so to speak, that I think there's quite a lot of international nonprofits and working in different fields all around the world where, okay, maybe some idea has been crafted in a think tank office in New York or Washington, D.C. or wherever, and then it's, flown over to Uganda or flown over to India and implemented there. Well, this is kind of a case working in reverse, that the program emerges from Rio de Janeiro, from the Global South. It's been implemented in a lot of places in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, in the Balkans region, and we've really learned through all of those implementations around, the developing world or the Global South, so to speak, and now bringing those ideas to communities in the U.S. where, frankly, there is a great need, as we all know, on this call and are dedicated to do. There's a great need for more and better prevention programming. So that's what funding from CDC has allowed us to do, is to bring this program to the U.S. Just going back, the curriculum has been fully revamped for the U.S. adaptation. It's called Manhood 2.0. This is available for free download online. And it's so far been implemented in Pittsburgh and in Washington, D.C. in sort of a flexible approach. There's 18 hours that we expect to be undertaken over the course of a semester or a school year, but the different locations, sometimes it's a youth club, sometimes it's right within a school, sometimes it's some other community nonprofit or, organizations like yours on the call can sort of adapt the delivery to what works best in that location. Maybe it's 3 different longer sessions or several more shorter sessions. And you'd have to, digging into the curriculum, you can see a lot of what these activities look like. But, it's probably a lot of things similar to what Project Dot was discussing that you all have done before. We certainly would have that man box discussion that we've done. We would do the things like the power and privilege walk. We would talk about different forms of power, positive and negative. We would really dive into identity and gender and sexual identity and, use that theory of change related to, working through all of those things together with your social group.
And Brian,
and so far I've had good success.
Before you get to Program P, I thought we could kind of share what's been coming up in the text chat because it's been quite busy and we want to make sure we're sharing that out. So I'm going to hand it over to Tori.
Thank you, Alicia. Yeah, thank you all so much for participating in our last text chat about how we are incorporating a gender transformative approach into our work. I saw a lot of folks bringing up how they are approaching gender pronouns and including folks of all gender identities, not just working within the binary, but working beyond the binary to really include all folks in our conversations, as well as catching ourselves when we mess up and turning that into a learning moment. I also want to call attention to what Rebecca Klein had mentioned. Hi, Rebecca. We're at the very beginning of this work, and we're so excited to be at the starting point and launch into more gender transformative work too.
Thanks, Tori. Just so everyone knows, because of the technical difficulties, we will go over a few extra minutes. But Brian, wondering if you can quickly tell us a little bit about Program P. I know it's something that a lot of us are interested in. We don't have a ton of time today, so if you can give us a little sneak peek in what that's about, we can share more resources.
Yeah, and of course, I'm already getting some kind of private chats, people who are interested, and I'd encourage you to do that. I'd be really happy to get on the phone or talk with people separately if you want to dig in more. So P for Padre means the work that we're doing using fatherhood as an entry point for men. And, I loved hearing the reflections from Project Dot about recruitment, and I think that could be an open question for everybody, like how do we really, in an accountable way, sort of call folks who identify as men into work for gender justice, but in a way that is truly holding our best standards of accountability. That's sort of calling men in, but not, coddling them either, like really calling them in and calling them out all at once. That men need to be transforming their ideas about gender and their behaviors if we're ever going to really achieve anything close to gender justice in the world. And for better or worse, fatherhood seems to be this domain where we're seeing in a lot of places around the world just pretty big changes over the generations, where men who are having children now, not everybody, but quite a lot of them expect that they would play a meaningful role in their children's lives, that they want to have close, loving, caring, nurturing relationships with their children, and they don't necessarily want to live this very strict binary heteronormative division of labor where the man, in terms of the child's life, is really just meant to be the one providing economic security and providing money, and the woman in a heteronormative situation would be the one doing all the care work. That men are actually eager to be to have those deep, loving connections. And so that was just kind of something we noticed, that, okay, here's a domain where men of their own accord are already pushing against some of those gender norms. And so we've built a similar kind of curricula around that entry point. A lot of the same activities. We're still going to go through Man Box and think of how that influences the division of labor in the home. We're still going to talk about power and privilege and violence and all those things, but kind of focus it also around real skill building around fatherhood. And this work, similar to that map I showed of program H&M, has taken place all around the world, but the one location where we had the opportunity through some generous funding to do a really big rollout and a very, the style of very rigorous, fancy evaluation that, academics and the publishing community would be interested in, was in Rwanda, where it was fully 1,700 fathers and their female partners went through an intensive version of Program P in one district in Rwanda. And we found, these bar charts demonstrate, compared to the control group in the evaluation in the darker blue bar, the lighter blue, which were the participating families, had very, as you can see, just dramatically lower rates of physical violence and sexual violence within those partnerships. Now, we should never accept or celebrate rates of violence as high as 33 or 35%, but by comparison, you can see that something is likely happening in those groups. And this is a kind of a complicated slide too, but I think it speaks to how far we've come, but also how far we have yet to go all at once. So if you look at the third pair of bars from the left, the one that says hours per day spent on unpaid care, we see that the light blue group, which is our participants, were participating in quite a lot, the men were participating in quite a lot more unpaid care on a daily basis than the control group, the dark blue bar, so 2.26 hours per day, which is, very meaningful. And we know that these unequitable burdens on women to be the ones undertaking all the unpaid, undervalued work within the home is a major element of economic injustice, and it keeps women from fully thriving in the labor force. So we believe that's a powerful finding to celebrate. But at the same time, you look to the right-hand side, and whatever changes we've been able to achieve with the male participants in the group, it actually hasn't translated into a reduction of the amount of time that women are spending on the work. So I think that is a real indictment, so to speak, maybe, or a real challenge for the field to move forward, that it's all well and good to have really powerful conversations with fathers, with men, and we have been able to achieve something meaningful in terms of increased unpaid work that they're taking on. But at the end of the day, truly accountable practice and truly principled practice needs to be translating into concrete material improvements in the lives of women and girls in their lives. And so far, we haven't been able to demonstrate that so much. So that kind of remains an open challenge and something that I'd love to discuss with everybody here, kind of how to pull that off. And then just kind of a final thing from me, to link back to that structural level we're talking about, and where I mentioned that Promundo does a lot of advocacy writing and work to push Congress in the U.S. and in other places on these areas. For a few years now, we've been producing something called State of the World's Fathers, where we really try to demonstrate from that intersectional feminist perspective, what are the measurable gains in more equitable time use between men and women in terms of that unpaid care work, what new policy changes are taking place around the world, and all of that distance we have yet to go. And there will be a new edition of this report coming out in June this year. But if anybody's really interested in kind of what that dialogue looks like, I encourage you to read these reports, and especially the State of America's Fathers, even though it's a couple years old now. That was a really rewarding piece of work, and we looked at a lot of these issues that are particularly relevant in the U.S., like non-resident fathers, or what happens when we know the incarceration rates that we have in a lot of our communities in this country, like what happens when one parent is behind bars for a long time, and we were able to dive into that and use it for advocacy here in the U.S. So I think I'll close there, knowing that I've left a lot of details.
Yeah, just to wrap us up for today, if you can maybe share like 2 or 3 things from your final wrap-up, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think the way I always like to conclude is even going way back to the very beginning, that bar chart I showed where it's so stark how the young men with the most rigid, harmful attitudes about masculinity were just 20 times more likely to also report sexual harassing behavior. In some sense, like knowing that social norms about masculinity are linked so strongly with all these negative behaviors, like it makes our task a little bit easier. Like we know we start to point toward the solution, and the solution needs to be obliterating those social norms, those harmful social norms. But so in a sense, it's kind of simple, but doing that is really complicated, as you can see. And even within this country, let alone worldwide, we have such diversity of identity and just what it looks like to interact with the man box and with systems of societal oppression for a young man of color versus a white man versus all different identities. It makes the work very tricky to pull off well. But we do, maybe I'll leave it on this slide. These are some of the learnings from Promundo's work all around the world that suggest these kind of considerations will help the work be most effective. Thanks.
And I think there's a lot of interest in your work, so hoping that you said that people are connecting with you on private chat, so that's great. I wanted to...
Just a couple so far. You're welcome to. Please do.
Yeah, others, please feel free to also connect. So I want to ask everyone participating today, we've had such great engagement in the text chat. I want to hear from all of you. How are you tying your efforts to broader conversations and momentum? So for example, have you been able to leverage momentum that's been built from the Me Too movement and been able to use that for prevention? Or are there other ways that you've been able to tie into broader efforts in your community? And if you have, we'd love to hear what your challenges have been, what your successes have been. So please use the text chat to share there. And while you're sharing, I want to introduce Casey, who's been patiently waiting to share from the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. I'm going to hand it over to Casey.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here with all of you. I have been learning along and participating in the text chat and learning from our friends at Project DOT and Promundo about their great work, but also learning from all of you. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to be in this space with you. I want to share that our work at the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence is really focused on capacity building through technical assistance, training, and resource development, but that all of that work is really rooted in our belief that domestic violence is preventable and our promise to center our work on the needs and experiences of survivors who are most marginalized. So given that, we really understand that norms change is huge in scope, and it requires us to actively challenge white supremacy, racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, really all forms of structural oppression. So in alignment with that, we're really committed to providing free resources and tools to support those of you who are looking to take this broad level approach to this work. So I also want to share that NRCDV is really honored to serve as a TA provider for CDC's Delta Impact grantees. And hello, I see many of you are on the web conference today. I'm really happy to see all of you. In that role, I want to take a moment to just highlight how the Delta Impact focus areas raise opportunities for norms change at multiple levels. And our presenters were really emphasizing, that it requires initiatives at multiple levels in order to make the real norms change that we want to accomplish. So you can see this chart kind of highlights by Delta Impact focus areas what are some opportunities for norms change. When it comes to impacting structural norms in our workplaces, schools, neighborhoods, and governments, this really reflects our commitment to create protective environments. Efforts to shift norms through peer leadership and mentorship networks is really the work of engaging influencers and bystanders. And advocating for comparable worth, living wage policies, workers' rights, and microfinance opportunities are important strategies to shift our cultural norms related to economic justice. So just really taking a look at norms along all of these lines and lifting up the great work that Delta Impact grantees are embarking on, through that project. I also want to highlight the Prevent IPV website. We feature an expansive searchable tools inventory that highlights some promising programs across the country and internationally. All of the tools also include guidance for adapting those materials in your own community from those who develop the tools. So there you can find tools developed and campaigns developed to address norms change among a variety of other prevention strategies. And so you can see on your screen, you can search our tools inventory by prevention strategy, and peer influence norms change is one of the many strategies that you can search by. So you can take a look and see what resources we have available there. We hope that you'll connect with us for technical assistance and training. We hope you'll access our websites for helpful resources to move your work forward. And again, just really appreciative of everybody that's been engaged in today's web conference and just happy to be a part of it. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Casey, and we've appreciated your active participation in the text chat, too. And I will say Prevent IPV is a great resource that I've turned to many times, so hope you'll all be able to check that out. So Ashley, what's been coming up in the text chat? How are people, leveraging momentum? What are some challenges? What's coming up?
Yeah, so it seems like folks are being able to leverage momentum, and so maybe broadening conversations in communities thanks to some of the things that have been in the news the last year or so. I think Drew gave an example that they've been able to create momentum with youth through using other avenues like video games, so things that youth are already engaged in, it sounds like. And then there was another comment around, some of the challenges are that, yes, there's momentum and we have opportunities, but sometimes these opportunities are not really taken because of the need to protect image. So Taylor gave an example about working with college students that really want to have these conversations, but there might not be a lot of space or support around that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that this is really an area of opportunity. We all have, or many of us will make resolutions in the new year, and I think a good one is how can we, tie our efforts to some broader conversations for prevention. So food for thought. And so I want to just give our guests a moment to just share any last reflections before we close out for today. So team from Project Dot, just like in a minute or so, anything you'd like to close off on, anything you have in reaction to the text chat question, wanted to give you some space.
Hi, this is Shasha, and I have Joanne here with me. So I want to quickly summarize some of our lessons learned. So we have used Project DOT at like 7 or 8 new communities from South Asian, Southeast, Latinx, Black, young people whose parents may have been incarcerated, Muslim youth, LGBTQ, and young men of color. So that's a pretty diverse group. And what we tried and did today was really provide you with a snippet, but our lessons that we learned along the path in terms of the social norms change is to really be thinking about the norms change strategies, be community driven, and then always, remembering that youth are the centerpiece of the work. So really pausing, taking the time and pausing to problem solve, but really problem solve with young people. So I really wanted to leave with those few tips. I wanted to see if Joanne had a few thoughts she wanted to, share with all of you.
Hello, this is Joanne. I just honestly wanted to say thank you to all of you, everyone listening. Thank you for giving, youth an opportunity to speak our truth and stand in that and supporting us. I really appreciate this opportunity and just 100 thank you so much. So thank you very much.
And what about from you, Brian? Anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Oh man, you're gonna make me go after Joanne. How can I go after Joanne?
Sorry.
It feels rude, but no problem. I think just to say we do have a tremendous opportunity as the issue of the sexual violence, as the particular moment in the long history of the Me Too movement sort of continues to become a major national conversation. We do have a great opportunity to open up conversations with people, but also, just to validate to everybody out there that it's still really hard to do. And I think we experience as Promundo, and if anybody else shares this reality, just, send my solidarity to you that we're in this field. We see systems of oppression for what they are. We are able to see the harmful patterns of masculinity, femininity, patriarchy. And once you see them, you kind of can't unsee them. But, every young person, every aunt and uncle that I'll go see at a Christmas party, everybody we try to talk to in the world, like they don't necessarily come to the conversation from that real grounded perspective. They don't come already with, a sociology training. And so sometimes the conversations are just so hard, right? Like one example I can think of is the name toxic masculinity is now a popular, I think wasn't the word toxic even like word of the year from the dictionary or something. Like we're all having a conversation about toxic masculinity. And I've had a lot of experiences where presentation up in front of college students or high school students, and without that grounding in our field, without that sociological perspective, like people hear the phrase toxic masculinity and think, oh, you're calling my identity toxic. And like calling someone's identity toxic is not exactly what we're doing at all, but it makes a really hard point to start a conversation. So I just want to say that Promundo struggles with this, and I validate anybody else struggling to find that way to call men in and call them out at the same time. Like to really demand that our male-identifying people step up to make gender justice a reality because they need to, but also do it in a way that's not, overly celebrating their minimal contributions, and that really is holding them to account to the groups who face the most oppression in situations. So I don't know. That was my tension always and at the end of the call.
Thank you, Brian. Well, I just want to thank all of our guests for the incredible insight and resources and the work that you've all been so willing to share with all of us on the call. Thank you to our friends at Prevention Institute for a wonderful season. And most importantly, thank you all so much for joining these web conferences, for sharing your insights and ideas and challenges and successes with us. And thanks for sticking around through our little little glitch earlier. We do have lots of resources that are listed in the PowerPoint slides, and so we will make sure that you all have access to those. You can go in and everything's hyperlinked, so that will be easy for you to access, hopefully. But until 2019, we wish you all a good rest of the year, and thank you again. This concludes our web conference for today. Take care.